What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka Toe Tag and Tambo, back for another edition of the Lineup HQ show. This time for the Saturday Wildcard edition, and I got my guy. It's the first time I've got to do a show with him. Tuttle, the man, Dan, the man with the master plan. What's happening?
Not much. Like you said, I'm excited to do a first show together, so it'll be fun. It's an interesting slate, so I'm excited to see kind of your thoughts and your leans on some of these plays as well.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to be tough to get away from some certain plays that we'll get into in a second here. But if just looking at it from sort of a macro or grand scheme of things point of view, Tuttle, what's your first thoughts just going into the slate? Obviously, it's a 3-gamer, a little bit different than what we're used to. This isn't a main slate we're talking about here, but there's ways to get unique. There's ways to get different. We'll try and chime those in within the next 50 minutes or so of this show. But what's your grand scheme of things and the overview that you've got here?
Yeah, I mean, first thought is, how do you get away from the Bills? Obviously, there are builds you can do that, but it's really hard to do. It's really hard to get away from that first game, especially when we have so much uncertainty surrounding Washington and their situation at quarterback, and how that offense will click in general with potentially not having Alex Smith there. So yeah, I mean, it's tough not to load up on that early game. I guess we can get some early screenshots in, I guess, but everybody else will be doing that too.
Yeah. How do we get them in when everyone's got the same ones, right? That's sort of a good point to talk about here. And we'll get into it as we go through position by position and try and link some thoughts of maybe whether we're using certain rules in Lineup HQ or different setups. If you're leaving a certain amount of money on the table, all of that. We could start with that. We've got the time, right? It's only 3 games here. We'll get into it. Indy Buffalo has the big total. The Rams versus the Seahawks see each other plenty of times throughout the season and now get to see each other again. So they should know a little bit about each other. We're still waiting, I believe, on the quarterback situation here with Jared Goff. I kind of got a feel he's going to go. We'll see. I know it was, I think, Thursday when they asked McVay, what does, he's limited. What's that mean? He said, I don't even know what the hell that means, to be honest. Just a thing that goes on the report, and we'll decide when we get closer to the game time. And then, of course, we've got the night game with Tom Brady trying to take another shot here in the playoffs. They are, I think, 8-point favorites here on the road, but Washington's going to have something to say about that. I know Chase Young was running off the field last week saying he wants Tom Brady, and this is a tough defense that he's going up against. So with that said, like I said, the early game is going to be pretty popular. Maybe talk just a little bit then before in position by position, Tuttle, about things that you do on a 3-game slate that might be different. Are you MMEing, first of all? Is that sort of your play that you're going to go with a lot of lineups here?
Right now, I just have one.
Okay.
But I do know, and I do have an MME lineup or MME angle, I guess. And I think it's kind of the angle. It's a little easier to pull off on FanDuel than DraftKings. But the slate in general is kind of, again, rough outside of that first game. And one position that I think is especially rough, again, this is more focused on FanDuel just because the pricing is a little bit more spread out there in terms of the tight end position. But tight end position is bad. Like we have Gronkowski who, I think he got 2 touchdowns his last game, but those were his only 2 catches. Like there's no high volume guys here. Logan Thomas is the highest volume guy that we might have. But again, if we throw Alex Smith out and Heineke starting, we don't know what that chemistry is like. Thomas, before he kind of went on this resurgence, was also like a 4-target guy. So my MME angle and my angle in general for GPPs, even if you're just running single entries, is kind of get a little weird at the tight end position. Basically just try to find a guy that's going to get a touchdown. And if you can find a cheap guy that gets a touchdown, you're in good shape. There is one guy that stands out easily on FanDuel is kind of the easy play again, because he's for Buffalo, high team total. Dawson Knox is kind of the really cheapie on FanDuel. That's easy, but even pivots off of him would be somebody like a Gerald Everett, who's going to be even lower owned than Dawson Knox. I don't love it, but on DraftKings, if we're talking the strategy like a Trey Burton, again, they're going to probably have to throw. They're probably going to be playing from behind. Burton, I don't know what we have on Burton's ownership. I'm trying to bring it up here. Probably
4.7%. Yeah.
Sub 5%. So, I mean, it's ugly, but again, I really think if you get a touchdown out of your tight end position today, you're in really good shape, and you can get that with some of these cheaper guys potentially.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's definitely, especially on FanDuel, where it's the sort of it's a onesie position on both sides, but obviously with a flex on the flex on DK, more people are prone to put them in there because sort of the point per dollar values work out. So they put two tight ends. And I know in large fields, it hasn't been the way, but on a 3-game slate, sort of, you can throw some of these rules out the window. Anything goes, right? You can leave 5,000 on the table. You can put a tight end in there that makes some sense. You can definitely, and we'll get into it at running back, go running back versus running back. You can put, in my opinion, up to 3 guys against your defense versus sometimes it's only 1. Like, it just really doesn't matter. And especially on a site like DraftKings with that full point PPR, I think everything's on the table, and that's more than eligible, something that you could pull off. We'll get to tight end too and go through it more in depth. Some of the guys you brought up there I like because there is some sort of ceiling to them. Even if today's ceiling at tight end is 18 or 20, that's, if Burton gets 18 points, that could break the slate in a heartbeat. So yeah. I definitely don't hate certain items like that. Let's move over to quarterback. We are going to start at the top here this week, just because it is a shorter slate. We've got more time to go through it. We've already talked about the elephant in the room with Buffalo and Josh Allen. So 40% is what we're showing here, Tuttle. I'm not sure what your take is on that. I've got one, but I'll let you go ahead first. 40% Josh Allen. What do you think? It's obvious, but what's your thoughts?
Yeah, we talked a little pre-show. That's probably light. We could definitely see him approaching, the 50% territory, possibly even higher. I do think it'll be a little bit more spread out on FanDuel because they have Russ priced so low on FanDuel that I do think people will gravitate towards him a little bit. Because he has this pretty significant discount from Josh Allen. So I could see those two for sure taking up the majority of ownership on FanDuel. But on DraftKings, it's hard. There's not as big of a gap between Russ and Allen on FanDuel. There's not as big of a gap between Brady and Allen. So I do think Allen is going to be complete chalk. But I don't know, like what percentage of the time is he not the highest scoring quarterback on this slate?
That's the issue. That's why I said, like, you mentioned it there, but you and I talked pre-show, and I know I'm pushing right now 69, 70% range. So, that's where I'm at. I do like to get a little bit of, a taste of other guys. Russell Wilson's one that I'm pretty high on it. I mentioned this on the Tourney Takes podcast with Kirkwood and Killa B, where I went through it and basically just said, like, it's a spot where he hasn't been quote unquote cooking. And so everyone's thinking, it's time they're just going to run the ball. It's that division game. They've seen each other. It's another time they're seeing it. I think it's the 3rd time now they're seeing each other. So, you've got that situation that you could try and attack. And he's only 15%, so it doesn't take much to get in there. But again, with going so heavy on Josh Allen, it's just hard to get away. The other one that I've come around on slightly, and I'll get your thoughts here, and then we'll switch to sort of the injuries or the questionables, is Phillip Rivers. And the only reason I'm not really in love with it, but I will say this, one thing I talk about quite often, and you know this for sure, is that, Superflex, what are we always using? 2 quarterbacks, because when one quarterback has a good game, the number one direct correlation to that is the opposite quarterback. But on classic slates or on something like DraftKings, FanDuel, main slates, you don't have that opportunity. You can't play 2 quarterbacks. So that's where the challenge is. I believe you do quite well with college football, correct?
I dabble. I do all right.
Yeah, you don't have to be humble here, Tuttle. So, I know you do quite well in that, I should say. And my thoughts are there, like, pretty obvious, but you're using 2 quarterbacks because they allow that. You can put 2 quarterbacks in, you can stack up both ways. The thought process for me is that when you switch over to a guy like Rivers, it's not ideal. I don't think he's Josh Allen here. I just think, what if he keeps up? What if, because of the pace that Josh Allen pushes, we get that out of Rivers? And then on top of that, when you stack with Rivers, you have no choice almost but to leave money on the table. It's almost impossible, which then leads to more uniques, et cetera, so on and so forth. So I do think that's one interesting angle. What are your thoughts on that? And then we can move to some of the other guys.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. And the other thing with it is, like, it can completely pay off too if we get a range of outcomes where, the top QB score is only in the 25 to 30 point range. Like, if Allen doesn't break the slate, then perhaps saving the salary at the quarterback position and spending elsewhere will get you to a different line of construction to go that way. Yeah. If we're talking like cheap quarterbacks, and I have one this is a terrible take. And I don't know how much exposure I'll have to him at all. We mentioned Goff's questionable.
Wolford, if Goff's out.
But even Goff, if Goff plays, like, just because we have the stackable pieces there, right? Like, we have Robert Woods. It's a heavily concentrated offense. We have Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Cam Akers. They're all going to do the heavy lifting. So if we just really want to aim for that correlation, it's there. And the other thing is here, and I've wrote about this in a couple different places, like, look at the Seahawks schedule. Yes, the Seahawks defense has been excellent, but, like, okay, last 6 games, CJ Beathard, Jared Goff, Dwayne Haskins, Sam Darnold, Colt McCoy, Carson Wentz. That's literally the quarterbacks they faced the last 6 games. Like, they've faced terrible, terrible offenses. Again, Goff is not a good quarterback, but he has stackable pieces. Like a 3 touchdown game, 2 Kupp, 2 Woods is not out of the question. And if that happens, you're in good shape, because only 5% of the people are going to have that Goff combination.
Yeah, I love what you said there. One thing, and we do this often with certain guys. I know and this is even better though. Like you just said, whether you like Goff or not, or you're a Goff hater, whoever out there, I'm just saying my point is it's a 3-game slate. There's only 5 other guys to pick from. So it's not really as bad as it normally may be on a main slate where you just can't stomach it. But the fact of the target tree, right? We have it when we got a guy like Kirk Cousins with Thielen and Diggs, and obviously Cook mixes in, but that's the idea of where you can go there. When we get to tomorrow's slate, when you've got Tannehill, it's pretty much Davis, Brown, and maybe a little bit of Jonnu Smith. Now here's the same situation. Goff is Kupp, Woods, maybe the tight ends. And again, also too, when we get to running back, we are going to talk about Akers. So it can play off of that. Cody, I see your question in the chat about Singletary. We definitely have enough time to get to that. So we will get there on sort of some leverage plays or decent positions you could make. But again, Josh Allen just stands out. The one we haven't mentioned yet, I guess then, is Tom Brady, because Tom Brady is, it's interesting because we haven't mentioned him. He's only showing up around 20%. I know there's the back of your head says Washington D, and the Chase Young mentioning that I gave earlier of him saying, I want Tom Brady. We want Brady, bring him on. But these guys got a 26-point team total and change. And he was the slate breaker just a couple weeks ago on a Saturday 3-game short slate when he played 1 half and did his thing. And then people had to pray and hope that Kyler Murray could do his thing and got lucky that Tom Brady came out at half, but it didn't end up working out. So what are your thoughts on Tom Brady with all that said?
Yeah, the best thing about Brady is like they don't want to run the ball. Tampa Bay doesn't want to run. They've skewed extremely pass heavy the past few weeks, and it's been successful for them. They're a team that even if they get up 21-0 or 21 points, like they're going to keep throwing. So I think that's the biggest thing going in his favor, is that this offense is going to skew pass heavy. It's not a great matchup, but we know volume will get there for him. And again, it's a slate where the other alternatives aren't that great, right? So it's like him being raw scorer, Brady ending up being the highest raw scorer at quarterback position is not out of the question at all. Yeah.
I've got like I said, a tougher, it's me that's got it in the back of the head with this Washington D. I just have this feeling, like I said, if there's this slate to me is, the upsets are Indy or Washington. I think one of those teams wins, and it would be crazy if it was Indy, because Buffalo's coming off of 56 and everything they've been doing, and almost an MVP style run. I saw somewhere that his, Josh Allen's accuracy improved by over 10%, which is a huge year over year at that position, and just, pushing him up to almost 70% completions or something, like just incredible numbers. So I think it'd be a hot take, but I think Indy could do it. Washington's the other one, but it's just because we've seen Brady come out washed, quote unquote, at certain points. So I think that it could happen. So we'll have to see how that goes. A lot of questions in the chat. We'll get to some of them right now. We'll save some of the positional questions. How much salary, we mentioned this earlier, Tuttle, how much salary are you comfortable leaving on the table on a 3-game slate like this?
Man, you can leave whatever, man. Like 2,000 is, I'm not leaving 2,000 in a main lineup, but if you're MMEing, you're running 150 out there, like you're going to end up with lineups that are, 2-3 grand left on the table. And I think that's fine. I mean, that's basically like when you're doing something like that, it's like you're playing T.Y. Hilton over Stephon Diggs in a lineup, something like that. That's the $2,700 difference right there. So the sky's the limit. Do you have a strict rule on a slate like this, how much you're going to leave?
I don't leave more than like 6,500, which is aggressive as is, but like that's typically sort of, I just made that number up, but it's like, I have no problem. Like I said, I've got a lineup like that. I also have no problem. One of the things I like to do is build what I would call the nut lineup, or something that I'm in love with. And I'm like, oh, I really like this lineup. But then of course it has Diggs in it, who I'm jumping ahead, but we've talked enough about Allen, is 70%. And I'll literally just take him out and put John Brown in and just leave it. Because that way It's like everyone has that build already with Diggs in there. I want to get away from that because we've seen it so many times. How many times do you have the best lineup going into the final game and you've got Devontae Adams and then he has his floor game of like 17 DK, even with a touchdown and a few catches? It's like if you just played, St. Brown or something like that, you end up breaking the slate and winning this whole tournament. So things like that happen, man. But I got no set hard and fast rule. I really don't mind leaving a bunch, and it's not something I aim to do, but that's why, like I said, I'll look for scenarios that make sense to me, sort of like the Rivers situation, where if he does have a good game and Josh Allen pushes the pace, all I really need him to do is come close or beat Josh Allen with that price savings, and then have those guys and his guys do the damage. And then I don't have a problem putting a guy like Diggs in on the other side, because I probably still have got $3,000 left on the table. So that's for me, quarterback Tuttle. Is there anything else you wanted to mention here? I sort of like all those takes. Alex Smith, Heineke, I'm not really too excited about either of those.
Can't see it.
No, too much going on. And with, like you said, with Josh Allen being so popular, we just have to think about ways as we get into these next positions of how we can get different within those builds. We already talked about some money back on the table, things like that. Alex is in the chat. What's up, Alex? He's talking about, playing 2 Rams wide receivers. You mentioned that. I actually think that's interesting. I don't know if he meant this, but, taking it a step further, playing Woods and Kupp, because these guys are PPR beasts. I'm talking about DraftKings here, playing both of them and then picking a different quarterback like Josh Allen, and instead leaving out a guy like Diggs and just saying one of those guys, if not both, beat Diggs, get the running touchdowns or something that you end up getting out of Josh Allen and getting away from the classic Josh Allen build. So I think that would be an interesting way to go about things. And then he also mentioned Josh Reynolds' season. So maybe he doesn't like the tight target tree that we've talked about there, but love Alex. Good guy, man. I wanted to hit him up in there. We talked about Kevin's question with that. Brady. Okay. Another quick question for here. Donnie Watson, friend of the chat. He's always in here. Has said Brady has had tons of success with downfield throws as of late. Does the Washington pass rush affect that? And then who benefits most in the short routes? He's shorten up his question.
Yes, it could affect it. Tampa Bay does have, I think, one of the best O-lines in the league, though, in general. So they should still be able to buy him some time. Could be shortened a little bit, but short routes, take Evans out of the equation. You're looking Godwin in the slot, and then Antonio Brown, depending on how they deploy him. But most of his targets have been shorter. He's seen a few downfield ones as well, but most of his target tree is kind of that shorter routes.
Yeah, I agree. That's where my thoughts were as well. So you've answered it. I think that's good. Will is in the chat. Will was going to be on the show today. Appreciate Will. Appreciate Tuttle. You stepping in here, man. Definitely can thank you for that. But he's been known, and this is Chief Justice, the Will Priester. He's talking about tight ends in the chat because he's been the tight end whisperer. He's been on 2 other shows with me. Both times he picked the tight end of the slate on main slates, and guys that not only were the tight end of the slate, they destroyed it. Waller a couple times. So I think that, it's worth mentioning. He brings up that Logan Thomas is his guy, and he's running it back with Godwin. So if that helps answer that question as well too, he likes Godwin there, and then run it back with Logan Thomas. We'll get to tight end. Let's talk about running back. Integrate this in here right now. We've got Cam Akers as the heaviest ownership at 40.9%. Chris Carson slightly behind, and then JT Jonathan Taylor is in there next. And it's interesting, in the chat has mentioned hard to play Taylor today, expensive for my build. I'm not going to say I disagree, but like I said, I've found ways to have Taylor and still leave plenty of money on the table. So it's realistically, it all comes down to your build structure, your construction, how you're, telling the story with your lineup and putting it out there. But what are your thoughts on these 3 guys at the top here, Tuttle, with Akers, Carson, Taylor?
See, Taylor ownership is the most interesting to me because, like, for us opto bros, us guys using optimizers, projections, like, Taylor's not going to find his way into lineups unless we force him in there, because projection wise, point per dollar wise, he's not going to pop as an excellent play. So I'm very eager to see what his ownership is, because us projection guys aren't going to get him in a lot of lineups, but I feel like general public will be like, okay, he's been crushing, we're going to jam him in. So I'm really interested to see his ownership, because he is a guy that, again, my instinct, if this optimizer is not going to spit out a bunch of Jonathan Taylor, why is that happening? Hey, I still think he's a good play. It's a good matchup. Like, I want to then start putting him in lineups. So I'm really eager. I don't think he's going to be low owned, but he probably goes a little lower owned than he should be. Like, I think people are just going to assume that Nyheim Hines takes over the pass catching role. This game gets out of hand early, and then it's going to all be Nyheim Hines. But like, Taylor's had a role as a pass catcher. He's shown that he can catch passes for the Colts. And we saw, I believe it was just last year, where Hines, like, we had a similar slate. It would have been a 2-game slate where everybody was on Hines because, again, the assumption, I think they were playing Kansas City. The assumption was they're just going to be behind. Hines is going to get all the pass catching work, but they just used Marlon Mack. He just ate all the work up. So it's completely possible that Hines is not used as frequently as people are assuming. And then Taylor is good in terms of PPR format. Then he's good. He's their best option or weapon on offense to score touchdowns. So I still like using Taylor quite a bit, even though projections are going to be like, hey, don't play this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just did this on the show. I know everyone can see my screen, but I did the RG edit live, and I'd never done this all season, but this is one. I was actually loving this, and I wanted to talk about it. And it's not that you just fully convinced me, but I was already about to bring this up. Is that I feel bad because I had Hines tagged here, and if I'm end up making a mistake here, it's on me. But I've come around to this a lot, and it was because of the point you brought up about the optimizer and the points per dollar and what everybody's looking at here. And, I get that the general public, so this is polarizing, like you said, because the general public sees last 5 weeks, whatever it's been, he's been absolutely going off. He's been their guy. But right now, I think a lot more people, and it shows in Hines ownership's already crept up to 23%, as I think people just assume with Josh Allen getting all his stack in there on the other side, that they're going to go with Hines and run it back. And I've come around quite a bit over the last couple of days on JT here. I just think that it's interesting enough that they could even use him more in the passing game. I think now that we're talking about playoffs and everything on the line and what they've seen in him is more than enough. They're going to do everything in their power to make sure that they can get through this and make a run at this. And I think he's going to be a big part of that game plan, as he should be. But, people see the 7.9K and see all these other value options. I know we're going to get to Jones in a second, the Washington guys, McKissick, who I think is very interesting. But I think that this does leave him a little bit out. And then now seeing in the chat here, it's, tough for guys to get him into their builds. That's just another point for me that goes in his direction. So I think 37 might be not light on our ownership projection, but maybe light on what he could or should be at. So I'm with you there 100%. Carry on if you had more. I just wanted to interject and bring that in. I did make the edit live here on the stream.
No, I mean, I didn't have much more. I think they obviously played them all last week, Taylor. But it is noticeable he ran more pass routes than Nyheim Hines last week, 16-9. And again, that was a game script that mostly favored, although it did neutral out there a little bit. It got a little bit closer than expected, but I don't know. I think Hines, I'm not going to try to talk anybody off of Hines because I can see the reasoning behind it. I think that's completely reasonable to think that he's going to get more work, but I think it really could just as easily swing to Taylor in the passing game as well.
Yeah. And again, build accordingly, guys. To Tuttle's point there, if you've got, Allen, Diggs, Brown, Knox, everybody in your lineup, and you're saying they're going to destroy and sealing out and score enough points there to do that, then yeah, absolutely. Hines makes sense running it back because typically that's what the, down 3 touchdown game looks like. Now it's time to start mixing him in more and see if he can break off a run for you, which would make you unique and be a little bit different in that sense. But I think that's the key piece there. Talk to me about Akers and Carson, the other two guys, the heavy ownership and the much higher sort of point per dollar guys, if you will.
So Carson's the guy that I think ownership's probably off on. Unless do you have an opinion on that? Do you think it's high? Do you think it's high or low? I think it's high. I think it's high. Nobody likes to play Chris Carson, right?
Yeah, I do agree there. I was going to say, actually, the only thing I could see is, and I'm not sure here, and we normally don't. Yeah, this is what I was going to say. I see the 31% Seahawks. People just love the natural correlation. Also, the fact that we could end up seeing Wolford. So that's where I do see why that could creep in a little bit if people are sort of trying to do the RB-DST secondary correlation or something. But yeah, other than that, I'm with you. I think it could easily come in around 25 to 30 before it comes in at 35 to 40, as we've got it here sort of in the middle. So what do you see sort of for their game plan? Or like I talked a little bit earlier about Russ getting back to the passing game, what's worked in the past, but this is a tough defense that they're going up against. And obviously the fact they see each other so often that it could just be one of these ground and pound back and forth games. And then maybe tie it in too, Tuttle, with can you use both Akers and Carson in the same build?
I'll answer that last question first. Yes, you can use Akers and Carson in the same build. Akers showed us last week he's going to be involved as a pass catcher too. Like Malcolm Brown will play third down, and that will be primarily his role, but Akers is going to be all the early down work. I believe he saw 4 or 5 targets last week. Darrell Henderson's obviously out of the equation now too, which just solidifies Akers' roles. Like they showed last week in a game that they absolutely had to win, and Akers was coming off an ankle injury, that he is their best chance. And they want to use him over Malcolm Brown. You could just see that by the touch distribution and the snaps distribution. Akers obviously didn't even have a very good game. He did fine as a pass catcher, but 21 rushing attempts on 34 yards isn't really going to get it done. But I think they showed they tipped their hand last week, like Akers is their guy. Carson, I think, is interesting because so he had that midseason injury, and then they kind of eased him back a little bit. And then I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, Hyde was active, but Carson was the guy. They made it look like he possibly to end the season, like he was going to be the guy going forward. He was going to get all the snaps. I want to say maybe it was against the Rams. But like I could see, even with Hyde back this week, I could just see them being like, okay, we rested you most of the season, or some of the season we kind of limited your touches, but like this is the week that Chris Carson is going to see, 70% of the snaps, which would be an uptick on what he has been seeing. So I like Carson, but at this ownership, he's probably somebody I'm not going to be overweight on. If you were to project him in like the 20-30% ownership, he's a guy that I would want to go overweight on. He has shown improvement as a pass catcher too, which is why I completely do not mind playing him in the same lineup as Cam Akers. I think both guys have enough involvement as pass catchers that they have a pretty decent floor, and they're not going to get, completely out of the game script if their team falls behind.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I do feel better about the Akers chalk, more so just because you mentioned it. Sort of the experiment is over there. Like they're going with Akers. It's like I said, they tipped their hand. I do think that makes a lot of sense. I like both these guys together more on FanDuel, because I think they're the touchdown guys. The running back position is not great. We're going to get into the rest of it in a second. You can take a bunch of different flyers. We'll name some of them, but I think that on FanDuel, you can just fit these guys in, no problem. There is a likelihood they each get a touchdown. So, the odds say that the games flow, everything sort of sets up well, just both sides, even where if they get in the red zone, there's an opportunity for them. And they're both good enough too, by the way, hence the ownership. So I really don't hate that. Don't be afraid to use them. We're getting near the top of the hour. Before we keep going through this position, guys, remember, yes, smash the like button, subscribe. If you want to get access to this tool, these ownership projections, everything that Tuttle and I are going through and looking at here, we haven't even got into all the ability of the build rules, the group stacks, the player groups, the stacks, everything that you can do with Lineup HQ. It's not really time for a tutorial session here on wildcard weekend. We're pretty much through the season, but I think it's definitely worthwhile and going back and checking it out and getting access to this for everything else we've got going on. Producer Devin just threw it in the chat. You can get $10 off your first month of RG Premium. So check that out. Moving along here, Tuttle, and going through the rest. Now people want to know about these plays that come in after that. Ronald Jones, McKissick. We already talked about Hines. Don't need to go there. And then Singletary was brought up earlier. Moss in a blowout maybe, but go through this next range with me and just talk about anything that stands out that interests you.
Yeah, when I did first glance at the salaries for this slate, I will say Singletary's salary jumped out at me. The thing is, like, we know we don't really need it, but I think he could end up being an okay tournament play. The thing is, like, people are gonna game log surf and see that Zach Moss has racked up a decent amount of carries. I forget what it's been. It looks like that last game obviously doesn't count, but like week 16, 15, Zach Moss 13 carries. And they're going to see that and think he's the leading rusher, but he racked up all those carries in garbage time in both those games. Singletary has been the guy that they've been using as kind of the RB1. And I know this because I've played Zach Moss thinking like he was a decent play. And then I was tilting until the end of the game when he finally started to get carries. Like, yeah, Singletary is, they like him as the pass catcher. The one downfall here with Singletary is they do like or prefer Moss at the goal line. So like Moss is going to get the goal line carries, but Singletary has the better chance of, potentially breaking a 20 plus type yard touchdown. He's the better pass catcher. He has the better pass catching floor. I think he's fine for tournaments. He's not somebody that I'm going to like have a ton of exposure to, but I think he's a completely fine play. McKissick, I think, is the interesting play because I think his status, and I'm probably placing too much weight into it, but like if Alex Smith isn't quarterback, I don't think I want McKissick. Like, yes, the game script, game plan still will go in McKissick's favor, but we just know Alex Smith loves to dump down. He doesn't like to take deep shots. Like that's just the type of quarterback he is. Like Heineke might not have the ability to throw downfield, but every single quarterback on the planet is going to throw the ball downfield more than Alex Smith does. And Smith is what has been making McKissick a good PPR option. So if Heineke's the one that's going to get, the majority of the snaps, or Smith's even inactive, something like that, then I don't like McKissick that much. Yes, the game script goes in his favor, but I think the downgrade, or not necessarily downgrade, but the switch at quarterback does make a huge difference for McKissick.
Yeah, and I agree. We've definitely talked about that throughout the season. The Alex Smith thing was, McKissick was built off of Alex Smith, the check down king. You just hit on that. I think he's still okay. I'm not, with the Heineke thing, I think, like you just said, the fact is he's going to throw downfield probably more than Alex Smith. Like you said, everyone is, but is he really going to throw downfield that much? Because we also still have to talk about, I know McLaurin's highly likely to play. He's questionable right now, but he just played through it last week and dropped like 7 for 40 and a touchdown. So I love McLaurin this week. I think less people are talking about him. We're about to go there. But real quick, lastly, and of note, it's not in the chat there yet, guys, but Cole Beasley just announced active. So that's going to be interesting when we move on here in a second. Nobody else for me, really, man. A bunch of flyers you could take, but I'm with you on everything you just talked about there with the Buffalo guys. I still do think McKissic is interesting regardless, and we'll go there. And then did you mention Ronald Jones? Because that's sort of the other one people want to talk about. I don't know if you're trying to force something to happen there by talking about him, or if it actually could happen here, but it just seems like a tough matchup. I still don't hate it though if he's going to be the 4th or 5th owned guy. That's the difference.
And he looked good he has looked good when he's gotten carries lately. I don't know if that's just comparing him to Fat Leonard, if that's like
pretty
why
easy
he looks
there,
good.
right? Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
But he looks so much better. I mean, Arians talked him up last game and said they were going to give him a ton of touches, which obviously did not happen. He has the finger issue. I think logically they'll use him as RB1 in this game. I don't think Fournette will play over him like he did last week, but that's kind of just a guess. But yeah, I think I think Ronald Jones makes sense. And I do like him as you mentioned the easy correlation is always just pairing these running backs with their defense, but Ronald Jones is probably going to be the early down guy. Fournette's probably going to be relegated to third down duties, if anything. So the game script that works in Jones's favor here is the Tampa Bay gets out to a lead. They run him a little bit more, and then the defense feasts. So I do like Jones as a correlation pairing specifically with their defense.
I could see that. And what's funny is, to your point earlier, I know we're bouncing around, but we don't talk about D, so I'm not worried about leaving it out later, is the Seahawks D at 31% goes hand in hand. I know that Jones still has ownership. I'm just saying it's funny that it's not quite nearly as much as what you see with, as much as people love the Bucs D, they're not thinking of that pairing as often as they are as the Seahawks and Carson. So I do like that. We'll transition here and pick it up a little bit, I guess, as far as pace goes. Like we already talked some about tight end, so feel good about that and spending some time here at wide receiver. But the big one is Diggs, and that makes sense. We already talked about Allen. It goes with it. I think the bigger picture is, obviously Diggs is a great play. He's, you can fit him no problem. He makes sense. PPR, touchdowns, everything, can break a slate in his own right. But is there a reason to get different? Is there a way that you could think about going different besides, the ownership's there, so it's easy to get different. But what are your thoughts on this as the overall thing, just with Diggs and Allen?
Yeah, you mentioned the ownership gives you a reason to get different on it. But there's no doubt he's far and away the top overall receiver. You look at the blitz. I'm looking at blitz projections by Derek Carty right now on FanDuel. So not even a PPR site, and he still projects 4.5 points better than the next in line, which is Terry McLaurin. And so he's far and away the top receiving option. Is it possible he does? Yes. And that's the reason why you would fade him, because 70% ownership, if you fade the guy that's 70% owned that puts up a dud, then you're in pretty good shape. And you mentioned it before, I like the idea of John Brown stacks without Diggs in there, especially now that we have Beasley. So Beasley, nobody's going to be on Beasley, questionable. And I don't know if he should be on Beasley. He might not play a ton, even though he's active. There's certainly injury concerns there, but Beasley and John Brown, over Stephon Diggs, lineups like that will make a ton of sense. If you want to eat the Allen chalk, but you're looking to differentiate, you can certainly do so just by pairing him with his different receivers. Diggs is easily the top play.
Yeah, and you nailed it there. Someone asked in the chat earlier, is it an obvious fade on Allen with the ownership? I don't think so. I think it's the obvious, that's what we're talking about. If we're wrong, we're wrong, but it's not like anyone else isn't saying this. It's just, I like going with the chalk there. Where I like making it different is getting off Diggs, because to me, it's just we've seen it enough times to know, and the sample size is large enough now. How many times has the highest priced wide receiver at the highest ownership, and especially in this case, busted? And again, people may not realize it, but when Devontae Adams is 9.2K and gets you 17 or 18 DK points on a slate that just everybody else crushes, that's a bust. I know he got in the end zone. I know he got a few catches and got his yardage, but he didn't make it. That's still a bust. So, it's not always just the raw points. And that's the situation here. Is there builds and constructions that can beat out a Diggs lineup? If Diggs has 15 points, absolutely there is. There's all you have to do is find 3 more wide receivers that go over that many points. And there's a lot of them. I think Godwin is certainly a good opportunity here even as the second highest owned. I think the more interesting spot, if you want to talk about him, you can, but I think the more interesting spot for me is Seattle. I was leaning Metcalf. We talk about him all the time, grown man stuff. I get the matchup. I go against that so often, and especially with Metcalf, because he's just bigger, stronger, better, end zone, red zone, anytime usage. There's just so many reasons to go there. But now the ownership, it's not that much of a delta between him and Lockett, but there's some, and this would just be the perfect spot where Lockett's $200 more. I talk about this often, paying up for probability. It's $200 more to get lower ownership, but it's a guy that absolutely has put up 40 and 50 points on a slate before. Not often, but he has and can, and this could be that spot. So what are your thoughts on these Seattle guys here? And then we'll get into the Indy guys.
Yeah, I mean, with Seattle, like if you want to be the guy that says like matchups don't matter, whatever, like that's fine. But you would want to capitalize on this DK Metcalf versus Jalen Ramsey matchup in a spot where Metcalf was going to be lower owned than Tyler Lockett. And that's not what we're projecting. So it's like, if I'm not going to get that ownership discount on Metcalf over Lockett, then I'm less inclined to just try to exploit or try to play the bad matchup just to play the bad matchup. So if the ownership discount's not there on Metcalf versus Lockett, then yeah, I'd rather play Lockett in a spot like this. We've seen it before, where Russ and Pete Carroll will just go to the guy that has the easier matchup. And that's why Lockett's had the monster games that he had. He had another pretty solid game last week as well. So yeah, I think this is a spot, especially on PPR, where they could just feed Lockett again and Lockett could get, 9-10 receptions.
Yeah, and I'm hoping this actually comes down. Like it's showing 23%. I'm hoping it comes down to like 18. I know it's so minor, but every little edge you can get or every little piece counts. And the thing is, my thought was too, and when I went back and did some digging and looked at it, was they actually did they did what you just said. Pete Carroll loves to go and go against the good matchups, the bad matchups, I should say, for his side. And they didn't target Metcalf a single time in the red zone this year against the Rams. So that to me is interesting, is even when they get down there to where he's going to score touchdowns, they didn't target him. It's Metcalf, guys. If you're playing a lot of lineups, do not go away from him. I'm just saying there's a reason. And I've got a lot of lineups here, and I can tell you I've got more Lockett than I do Metcalf by a significant amount. So that's, enough to talk about there. Indianapolis Colts, guys, we both said it. I think we like John Brown. We don't have to go there before we get to the Colts, guys. People are talking about it in the chat. Do you like Brown? I love Brown. I think a lot of people do, but I think for the right reasons. The interesting thing is now Cole Beasley. So yeah, let's do that. Actually, we got time here. Before we get to the Colts, guys, what is the new dynamic here now that we've got Beasley on the slate related to 1, John Brown, Diggs, however you want to mix it there, and then 2, McKenzie and Davis, who people were sort of sprinkling in without their lineups because they were expecting Beasley to maybe be out after all the DNPs.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I can't say I have a strong read on Beasley's injury situation. I know it's been, he's a true game time decision today, basically. And now that he's active, it looks like he's going to play. But if you think he's going to be limited at all, like stay with the Gabriel Davis plays. Like Gabe Davis wouldn't be somebody that I'm loading up on now that Beasley's active. But if you think there's certainly a chance that Beasley's active and just somewhat limited and Gabe Davis still gets mixed in. So I'd still be fine with some ownership on kind of the secondary receivers for Buffalo in this spot. I think the interesting question, again, if you have a better read on the injury situation than I do, I think the interesting spot would be like, if you think he's going to be near a full go, grabbing exposure to Beasley now would be really interesting to me, because I do think John Brown's going to be much higher owned. I do think Stephon Diggs is obviously going to be much, much higher owned. So I do think playing Beasley now makes sense from a game theory perspective, but it's also a little scary not having a good read on if he's going to be limited at all.
Yeah, that's the worry for me. And there was like 3 DNPs in a row, and it reminds me of like Simpson writing on the chalkboard, do not play, I know it's did not practice, but to me, it's kind of like, do not play, do not play, do not play. It's all I can think about in my head, because we've seen it so many times. The guy, it can go both ways. I feel like it's went more the way of they come out, and then what ends up happening is people at the last minute move all these great ideas and builds that they had and all these constructions they worked so hard on, and just fit him in. At the same time, no one's going to be on him. I think if you have a lot of lineups, definitely get him into some, but think about it accordingly, how you're building it. I'm still fine with Gabe Davis off of maybe a Diggs lineup, right? Where I could go with Davis as the guy that catches a bomb or something that does enough to crush the Diggs play, and then you could still mix them up, but that's just a thought process there. Indy guys, we still got to talk a few others, so we'll probably have less at tight end. We've already talked a little bit about, Logan Thomas, Gronk, Dawson Knox, the Higbee Everett situation, so I'm okay if we miss there. We've got about 10 minutes left, guys, for questions and getting through the rest of this. Indy guys, Hilton, Pascal, and who am I missing? Indy Pascal.
The guy
Pittman,
that never
course,
catches,
Pittman.
Michael Pittman, yeah.
Yeah, the rookie, man. He's coming up. He's doing his thing. But, yeah, no ownership on Pascal and Pittman. I kind of like those guys. And then Hilton as well. But any thoughts or ways you're going about it with those guys?
Yeah, I mean, Pittman went from a guy that was pretty liked to just he has done nothing. So, the public perception on him is all-time low, and he's really cheap. Obviously, we would like to see a little bit better game logs from him, but that's also going to be what drives his ownership down. Like, he's still on the field. He's still running routes. He's still their wide receiver too. Pascal's the guy that's going to be operating in the slot. So Pascal's fine too. But like, Pittman is so cheap where I think he's an intriguing play, especially because I think the chalk build on DraftKings specifically is going to have T.Y. Hilton in it. So I do like the idea of using like a Zach Pascal or Michael Pittman in place of T.Y. Hilton, and just even making that a 2v2 if you're playing cash games, or even if that's going to be your main tournament lineup. I like the idea of getting off of Hilton and doing a 2v2 with either Pascal or Pittman.
Yeah, we don't show it a lot on here, but because we're here, might as well. I mean, this is one of my favorite features, but for me, I'm with this. I don't know if you would do the same, but just for me, unless I'm doing river stacks, I should say, but I'm at most one of Pascal or Pittman. I think one of them definitely can have a big game here. I don't see both of them getting there, but if it happens, like I said, I would have it within my Rivers build. So it's not saying I'm not on that. I'm saying that's a plan in my Rivers builds. When I'm not in Rivers builds, I don't like having more than one of those guys. I think it would be better to have Hilton in one of them, or Burton in one of them, or whatever it might be, where you're getting a little bit different in that sense, and then leaving some money on the table. Some guys are mentioning Doyle or Burton. Again, they'd be a max of one for me, but I think either of them could end up having a bit of a ceiling. I lean Doyle, but Burton probably does have more ceiling. I just feel like he also could, have a zero here. So that's the quick thoughts on that. Want to talk about the Tampa Bay Washington game, maybe chime them together. We still got 7 or 8 minutes here and the questions, but putting those together, I'm big on McLaurin. I think he grinds through it and fights. That's really, if he wasn't questionable all week, his ownership would not be 18%. Let's just say that. And he fought through it last week. It's a must-win playoff game. It's win or you're out. So for me, I'm in on McLaurin. But any thoughts on the Washington guys? Either quarterback at the helm, and then the Tampa Bay guys will save for last.
Yeah, I mean, McLaurin definitely top Washington receiver. Tampa Bay mix and match everybody, even Evans, who's been limited with that knee injury. Who knows the extent of that? But Evans is another guy similar. If you feel like you have a better read on the injury situation than him, try to make a play on that, whether it be going completely overweight on him, or if your read is that he's going to be extremely limited, then lock in Godwin, lock in Antonio Brown, that type of thing.
Yeah, I agree there. Cam Sims would be interesting from the Washington side. He stands out a little bit. Again, I'd look at how you're building those lineups. I don't mind if Alex Smith plays, getting McKissick and Thomas together would be okay with me. I'm not saying you need to stack it up. Again, it's almost like how I mentioned earlier, how you can use the Rams guys as the PPR dudes, and then you've got the same sort of thing here. I'm not saying play Alex Smith in that stack. I'm just saying they can rack up the points with checkdowns on Alex Smith. You could see 10 targets to Logan Thomas and 8 targets to McKissick. And if either of them do anything with those, that would be huge for your build. And then that's, again, maybe a way to get different and unique. But Cam Sims would be the other guy that's interesting. I just wouldn't really put him in that same class of those builds. And then to your point, and I love Godwin. I think his ownership is there as well. But this is crazy, man. 70% on Diggs, 30% on Godwin. And I fully understand that people are putting these two together in the same lineup. So that's why that's the case. But I think it's very easy for me just to look for a Diggs build that doesn't have Godwin and just drop Diggs and put Godwin and leave it, because I've just now dropped my total overall. And we don't talk about this a lot, but Lineup HQ, one of the great features, max total ownership. We're not using this today on here for the sake of the time and just the factors of getting you guys all your questions answered. But if that would be the case, that would drop your total ownership by 40% in one click, right? Maybe 3 clicks, and click to get them in there. But you know what I mean, right? So we'll talk about that. Anything else at wide receiver you want to bring up, or should we move it to tight end and then save some room here for the questions?
Yeah, the only point I wanted to make, and you mentioned with this Washington passing attack, and you mentioned why I want Alex Smith to play, because we know what he's going to do. I think it's important to note that, like, hey, just because a team is going to be playing from behind does not mean they're going to be efficient. Like, it doesn't mean that they're going to all of a sudden smash just because they're playing from behind and going to pass the ball more. And that's what I fear with Taylor Heineke, is that, like, if they're playing from behind, we just might not get any production at all out of Washington. Whereas if we're getting Alex Smith at quarterback, they might not move the ball, just like they're not going to move the ball with Heineke, but at least they're going to do it with 1-2 yard passes to J.D. McKissic. So that's my only point. Just because a team's playing from behind doesn't mean you want to stack up on their passing attack necessarily.
And I love that point. And we're pretty heavily involved on Twitter enough to see it, but we've all seen it. A team's down 21-0, and then all the tweets go out, then establish it. Very sarcastic, saying, and now know the team, all of a sudden they're running it with down 3 touchdowns. It doesn't just mean it's all of a sudden a free for all. It should be in our minds as Twitter GMs saying, like, why are they not throwing the damn ball? But this is the point. It's not always 1-for-1. And again, knowing some of this situational stuff, much like in NBA or other sports where rotations and things like that, it's almost knowing what could happen. And that's why we wanted to bring that to you guys here today with the quarterback situation. Alex Smith, in both of our opinions, makes a huge difference on the guys like McKissic and Thomas. Eric Johnson, another guy always in here. Appreciate you, man. Talking about David Moore. You mentioned this a couple times, won the Millie last year for guys. That's not a product of David Moore's the Millie Maker winner. It's the product of guys like him could be or can be or will be in some cases, but it doesn't mean it's going to be David Moore again. There's other guys that could be. Definitely, if you're mixing in those stacks, use him, right? People are definitely using Metcalf and Lockett more. There you go. That one goes together well. Moore, though, could be a guy that you could throw in there over Metcalf if you just do it, just 1-for-1, because you're saying that we just talked about Pete Carroll doesn't like that going to that matchup. Russ Wilson hasn't shown the propensity to go to that matchup often. And then you've got a spot where you could just fill in and it could end up being Moore taking it away from him in the end zone. And that ends up being the play. So don't hate it. Got some questions flying in here now. We talked a lot of tight end, so I don't feel like we have to go into it. Doyle at tight end. What's your thoughts on the Doyle versus Burton? That's one of the questions, so we could bring that up.
I would prefer Burton, upside to Burton. I will say again, I think it depends which site you're playing on, because I think there's a lot more merit to going real cheap at tight end on FanDuel. But I do think this is a position where a touchdown could win you the slate. So this one's a real ugly call, but like, nobody's going to play Greg Olsen. Old ass Greg Olsen, who has been out of the picture for a while. He took last week off because his plantar fascia flared up again. The week before that, he only played 12 snaps. But like, one Greg Olsen touchdown, and you now have a lineup that 1% of the 1% of people have, because Greg Olsen's going to be 1% owned. So I actually am looking on FanDuel at lineups that involve Greg Olsen, just because I think it makes so much more sense to completely punt the position there.
Yeah, and like you said, because you don't really know, no one is the standout. So I don't hate that. That's definitely a good strategy. I'm going to answer a couple things quick then, and we'll get out of here. So Pranav, I apologize. This is not a Saturday, Sunday show. We actually have a full show dedicated towards tomorrow. I know I believe you're a premium member and have been on here often enough that we've got a lot of articles and content out that we're directed towards the full slate, that you could just piece them together and get the plays that way. To me, I'm not as high on it either. I'm playing very little on the 2-gamer. I know everyone asks for it, and I love the late swap positions that you can make in it, but I personally still like that on the 3-game slate, so we want to keep it very dedicated. And then Eric, to your point, this is a great point. I'm going to round it out on this and end the show. You said I'm not playing 300 lineups though, and this was in relation to the David Moore comment. It's to each their own. I'll leave a little bit of wisdom here at the end, or my own personal wisdom. Whether you believe in it or not is up to you. But if you're only playing one lineup, let's say even, and you want to make money, I get it. But if it's in something like the Millie Maker, which you've referenced, and to me it's all entertainment, then why not play to win? The guy that had Marcus Mariota in his captain slot in that showdown slate said, screw it, I'm playing to win. I think he had one lineup, ended up winning $500K or whatever it was. If you're here, build your lineup with Metcalf that you like, swap Metcalf to Moore because you've got a gut feeling about him, and see if you can win yourself $1 million. And I hope you do if it's not me. So Tuttle, thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate you. Everybody in the chat, we appreciate you. I'll be back on tomorrow for the Sunday show. Other than that, thank you guys and good luck.
Wildcard weekend is here, and I'm back with 6 of my favorite plays on FanDuel and DraftKings, including some guys I think are underpriced, some guys I think have some big ceilings here. And what quarterback am I locking in, not named Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson? Belly up to the fantasy bar and find out. Welcome in, guys. Wild Card Weekend edition here. Beers Daily Fantasy 6-pack. Good to be back here once again in the Fantasy Bar, providing you 6 guys fresh off the tap on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Thank you, as always, for stopping by the Fantasy Bar. Now, before we get into the plays for Wild Card Weekend, guys, do me a favor. Click that thumbs up button. It means a lot. It helps us out tremendously here at Rotogrinders. So if you enjoy the video, you enjoy hanging out at the Fantasy Bar, that is all I ask in return. These videos are free, and I greatly appreciate the support there with the thumbs up. So, challenging you guys. Let's see how many we can get. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and get notified when these videos are coming out. Now, before we jump into the playoffs, let's take a quick look back at our final week of the regular season in Week 17, and a so-so week. We had some spots that were not so great. Tunyon found the end zone, didn't do much. Corey Davis kind of quiet. Kiki Cutie was all right, but hit it big with our running backs and Deshaun Watson, all producing well above their prices. So we will turn the page here to the playoffs. I know the sites have things divided into 3 and 3, but there are some 6 full game slates you can play as well. Regardless, I like these guys in all formats. However, you are playing the NFL playoffs. Let's start at the wide receiver position. Guy I think has a massive ceiling. That's Chase Claypool of the Steelers. Now, the Steelers receivers, one of those things we always debate. Deontay Johnson, clearly the safest, a guy getting a bunch of targets. Juju, banged up, dealing with a knee injury, did not practice on Thursday as of this recording. So that may lead to even more opportunities. But even if he's in there, I still like Chase Claypool. He's getting targets in this offense. We know they love to throw the ball. 8 or more targets now in 7 of the last 10 games. Been very good against this Cleveland team, including last week in Week 17. Even with a backup quarterback, Chase Claypool did well, averaging over 21 DraftKings points a game against Cleveland this season. And we mentioned the ceiling. I want guys that can give me a massive output and greatly outproduce their salaries. And Claypool, one of those guys. And if Juju's in there, he is the cheapest of the 3 on both sites this weekend. So a lot of chatter out there. They're really going to unleash Chase Claypool here in the playoffs. To me, that's only the icing on top. Whether it's true or not, I don't really care. I've seen this guy do it. I know he can do it. This Browns defense is dealing with a lot of injuries. This team's dealing with a lot of COVID issues. I think Pittsburgh rolls here, and I think a big reason why is Chase Claypool here to lead us off in the mid-range. All right, let's go to the running back position. This one not going to be for everybody. We're going to go cheap here with Gus Edwards of the Ravens. Now, I get it. J.K. Dobbins, the big name, the sexy new toys, it says in the graphics in that backfield. You also have Mark Ingram there back in action last week. But I think Gus Edwards is going to be the forgotten man here. First of all, a lot cheaper, only $4,400 on DraftKings, under $6K on FanDuel. Does not need to do a ton to pay that price off. Ownership-wise, you're going to get a massive discount here on Gus Edwards. There's some running backs I think are going to be very highly owned on this slate. Guys like Akers, Carson. Edwards going to be a forgotten man, a great way to save some salary here. We got a massive total in this game. He's getting the workload as well, averaging almost 14 touches a game over the last 3 weeks of the season. You're thinking, 14 touches a game at 4,400, at 5,700 on FanDuel. I'll take 14 touches a game any day of the week, especially against the Tennessee Titans. There was not a team in football that allowed more fantasy points to the running back position than the Tennessee Titans. So a great matchup, low ownership, and a cheap price. Add it all up, Gus Edwards, a great play this weekend across the DFS industry. All right, let's go to the tight end position. We're going to spend up as far as the position goes, but still pretty cheap here with Logan Thomas of Washington. Now, Washington, we know, big underdogs here in this game against Tampa Bay. You look at the passing game, and it's basically Terry McLaurin, the running backs a little bit, but it's a lot of Logan Thomas here as well, and it's kind of shown in the numbers. 10 targets per game over the last 5 weeks, a big 50 targets there for the math challenge for Logan Thomas. Double-digit DraftKings points, as you kind of expect with all those targets, but he's done that now in 9 of the last 11 games. So this guy really starting to develop right before our eyes. And when we look at that Tampa defense, we know they're very good against the run. They're not good against the tight end position. Bottom 5 in fantasy points allowed over the last 4 weeks and over the course of the entire season as well. So vulnerable in that spot. Washington probably throwing a ton. I don't care if it's Alex Smith, Tyler Heineke, does not matter to me. Logan Thomas, a big part of this offense, going to be a big part of my wild card builds here on both sides. All right, let's go to the running back position and spend some money this time. We're going to go right back to the well on Jonathan Taylor of the Colts. And this is another one I don't think is going to be for everybody. I think a lot of people expecting Buffalo to roll in this game. I think the Colts are good enough to keep this game close. And the way they do that is through Jonathan Taylor. Now, you got to pay up for him. No doubt here in this matchup. Generally, I don't like running backs as road underdogs here, but I love the matchup here with Buffalo. Over the last 4 weeks, Buffalo has allowed the most fantasy points to the running back position. We know over the course of the season, they have not been good against this position as well. So I think you're going to see a heavy dose of Jonathan Taylor in this matchup with Buffalo. And the ownership, a lot lower than I expected it to be. I expected Jonathan Taylor to be one of the highest owned running backs, and maybe we get to that point once these games kick off, but initial run has him down the list a little bit. So highly encouraged by that he's not going to be heavily owned. Plus, played a ton of snaps, 84%, a season high in snaps last week against Jacksonville. Sure, this game could get away from them. You see a lot of Nyheim Hines, but again, I think they keep this game close. It's under a touchdown on the line, so we're not expecting a blowout here and can be involved in the passing game. Jonathan Taylor playing too well against an awful Buffalo run D. All right, back to the mid-range, back to a ceiling play at the wide receiver position. Another Raven for us, Marquise Hollywood Brown. Now, do you want Brown, Edwards in the same lineup? Maybe not. I don't hate it in a game stack, but the point is I like Brown here as well, so wanted to make sure I got him in the six-pack. First of all, pricing. He's all the way down to $5,400 on DraftKings. We look back, we got to go all the way back to week 12 in a tough matchup against Pittsburgh to find a cheaper price on Hollywood Brown. Touchdowns, been there as well, was kind of quiet to open the season, but 6 touchdowns now in the last 6 games for Hollywood Brown, and what a matchup this is for touchdowns, for wide receiver production, however you want to look at it. The Tennessee Titans, not very good defensively, awful against wide receivers, and allowed the 3rd most touchdowns to that position, 22 on the season. Again, Hollywood Brown, a huge upside play at a very cheap mid-range price on both FanDuel and DraftKings. All right, it's time to take a look at my favorite play for Wild Card Weekend. But before we do that, as always, we're going to continue our Beast of the Week contest, absolutely free to play. All you got to do, get in the comment section right below the video and give me fantasy points on FanDuel for my favorite play. The closest guess will win themselves a free week of Rotogrinders Premium or a free Rotogrinders t-shirt. Without further ado, let's wrap up Wild Card Weekend. My favorite play, you know him as the Beast of the Week. All right, Beast time. I owe you a quarterback. We said it will not be Josh Allen. It will not be Lamar Jackson. We're going to go back to that Ravens-Titans game with Ryan Tannehill, this week's Beast of the Week. Now, let me be clear. I have no issues with Josh Allen, with Lamar Jackson. We know those are the 2 highest projected quarterbacks here. We know the ceilings that those guys possess. But I'm going to save a little bit here and go with Ryan Tannehill for a lot of different reasons. First of all, we talked about the high total in this game, the highest total we have on the board here. We talked about the Titans being underdogs in this game. That could lead to more passing opportunities. I know they want to run everything through Derrick Henry. They may not be able to do that here in this game against the Ravens. And even if they are, we've seen Derrick Henry.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to a Saturday edition of NFL Crunch Time here on Rotogrinders. Happy to be with you, breaking down some playoff football. Should be some really interesting games. We've got the new wild card format this year, so we've got 6 games this weekend, 3 today, 3 tomorrow. We'll take you up through lineup lock here. Indianapolis and Buffalo getting ready to kick off in about 30 minutes. So we'll take your questions. We'll go through our favorite picks here real quick, and then be sure to take your questions. So make sure you get in the Crunch Time chat on the Discord, the Rotogrinders Discord. It's always popping off during the NBA Crunch Time, so we'll be happy to take your NFL questions here too
leading up to lock. So it's Justin and Justin today. That's a little bit weird for me to say, but we've got the Luch with us today. I'll probably just refer to him by that name because it's weird to say Justin to somebody else for the next 30 minutes. But Luch, what's going on?
Not much. A pleasure. I don't think we've worked together, so it's cool to be hanging out with you on a super exciting weekend, super wild card weekend, and we're rolling right up till 1 Eastern, and there's going to be a ton of ownership in that game, so it's obviously every game's integral on a 3-game slate, but when when 1 p.m. has probably the chalkiest quarterback, it's pretty popular and a lot of stacks in that game. It should make for an interesting early kickoff to this crazy weekend.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see where ownership lands. And, the most difficult part really is that the big injury news is in the late game, primarily with Antonio Gibson. Seems like Mike Evans is going to be good to go for Tampa, so we don't have to worry about that one as much. But with Antonio Gibson's status and that being the late start, how are you kind of handling that right now as you finalize your lineups here?
I kind of lean toward McKissick regardless, just in terms of probably predicting a game flow. And Alex Smith, loved the story. He's still kind of captain check down. You bring in a third string quarterback who hasn't had a ton of success, who might get the start. And I kind of feel like, trend is your friend, and you won't see a lot of shots downfield, most likely. A kid playing in a playoff game against Tom Brady. I think he has 70, 75 or 77 career passing attempts. So that kind of changes a lot of things, more so the Alex Smith news for me, in just terms of maybe how that game might play out as a whole. So that's going to put a lot of strain on that Washington defense, which has been pretty good the last, pretty much for a duration of the year. They were pretty serviceable, streamers or kind of value plays at defense. But for me, I kind of actually like McKissick, maybe probably a little more now. I'm willing to maybe leave a slot or two open in that late game if I'm playing kind of multi-entry in a couple of lineups here. And you made a point about Mike Evans on the flip of the bill there. I think there's an opportunity to get some leverage in that late game, depending on what we find out. Hopefully we get some news, an hour or two before kickoff of that game. That, for once, that would be nice.
Yeah, to make those tweaks. And if we get word on a snap count for Evans or something like that, right, if there's going to be any limitations, you can adapt from there. So, and if we look, on that Washington running back situation here, you do have Gibson at 5,700 on. I've got DK up here right now. You've got Gibson at 57, McKissick at 48. So, if you roster Gibson, if you are, looking to play him, you could pivot down. Worst case scenario, if he's inactive or something like that, you'll have the salary to get down to McKissick. McKissick is cheaper than Gibson on FanDuel as well. So just ways to make sure that you've got that flexibility heading into that late start. So, all right, let's go through the quarterbacks here. You mentioned Josh Allen and the most popular quarterback being in that first game. So that will certainly be the case. You can see Josh Allen. We've got at 40% ownership on DK, 36% ownership on FanDuel. So he is going to be the most popular, and it's pretty difficult to avoid Buffalo given their team total. They have the highest team total of the day, and they've been playing some really good football over the last few weeks. So what do you do with Josh Allen, and is there anybody that you would even consider, a serviceable kind of number two or pivot away from him?
For me, it's play Josh Allen for me. Buffalo, much like Kansas City, just refuses to run the ball. And DFS is all about opportunity. Josh Allen has had his all season long. If you take a look at our Gridiron IQ tool, awesome stuff we have on RG. Out of all these playoff teams, Indy, on top of everything else, the Colts are second worst in yielding successful passing plays. On top of the volume, Josh Allen's going to be chucking the ball all game. We've seen 16 games from the Bills, and they just don't run the ball. It's funny, you see Derrick Henry in the AFC who gets 30 touches a game, and I think Devin Singletary had under 25 in his last 3 games itself. So Zach Moss every now and then kind of rears his head, but he's not going to get any volume either. The Colts have been really good against the run all year as it is, so I don't see much change in what Buffalo is going to do here. And, it's always nice to fade the chalk and find the right leverage play. But in terms of upside and just with everything considered here, I'm locking in Josh Allen today. I think you play him in all formats. But of course, if you're playing, the $4 FanDuel tournament with a bajillion entries, whatever it is, you want to maybe have some shares of, you mentioned who's maybe a 1B. And it's tough. Maybe there's not exactly a 1B in my opinion, Josh Allen today, but I do have interest in Tom Brady, especially, if Washington, and I think they will struggle to sustain drives, maybe giving Brady and the Bucks a couple of extra hypothetical possessions and some decent field position there. So I kind of would say Brady would be my second, 1B option to Josh Allen.
Yeah, it's just hard. It's hard to endorse, Alex Smith. There's been rumors of a potential timeshare there. Jared Goff's banged up and hasn't looked great. Russell Wilson, tough matchup against that Rams secondary. So those are going to be the two most popular guys. Certainly don't mind stacking up some of the other quarterbacks with their pass catchers, but Allen is the clear number one. I mean, I think most of your rosters, you want to make sure you have exposure to that Buffalo offense today. And Allen, would certainly be that guy. And let's go ahead and talk about receiver in tandem with that. We'll come back to running backs, but Stephon Diggs probably doesn't get enough appreciation for how good he was this year. Led the NFL in targets, led the NFL in receptions, led the NFL in receiving yards, and it's just been super consistent week in and week out. And you've got tough matchups for a lot of these other top end wide receivers today. So if you're playing Allen, it's pretty hard not to pair him with Diggs, especially in tournaments. And at 70% ownership, I mean, in cash games, you're just playing the block there and putting him in as your wide receiver one. So presume you agree with that. And then where do you go after Diggs?
Yeah, I'm on board with you there. And, you see a lot of great research across the industry, and especially on Rotogrinders. I love the articles that Eric does on like 2-game slates with full stacks, and, some of the premium articles he's done there. And I think you can really, stack the Bills. I mean, it sounds like I'm Captain Obvious here, but there's plenty of ways to go here. Cole Beasley looks like he's in as well, and he's really had a hell of a season. What a great pickup, and he's fit right into this offense. But in terms of GPPs, I think Gabriel Davis is pretty interesting. The last 2 weeks, he's actually had more of the air yard market share than Diggs, not by a crazy margin, but with John Brown coming back too, and he looked pretty good when he's back as well. And some would say there's more mouths to feed there, but if Josh Allen is going to throw the ball 45 times today, those mouths can be fed. So for me, I kind of like doing a little stack with the Bills. I think there's more than Stephon Diggs, that's definitely playable here. And just looking at ownerships, I think there's some leverage opportunities in rolling out some more of these Bills against the Colts. At the receiver position as a whole, there's still some unknown circling around Mike Evans' situation. Is he going to be on a pitch count? We don't know. This is the same Mike Evans that had that weird NFL record earlier in the year. 2 catches for 2 yards and 2 touchdowns. So they're going to put him on the field
line there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's going to happen again, but he will be used in the red zone regardless in this game, even if he is on a pitch count. And we have him projected, at least on FanDuel, at sub 15%. So on a 3-game slate, Mike Evans has kind of taken over that alpha role in terms of air yard market share the past couple of regular season weeks, aside of week 17, when he got injured. So in terms of GPPs, I am very much so interested in Mike Evans. Not a cash games play. I'm personally not playing any cash today. Don't play Mike Evans in cash, but I'm, like looking at this list of receivers, I'm definitely targeting Mike Evans in that later game, especially, I just think they're going to be set up in some really nice field position if Alex Smith indeed does not play later.
Yeah, good calls there. I like that. And we're going to have, I think maybe a little lower ownership in that late game, just kind of with the uncertainty, and, everybody wants to get off to that head start, and the Rams Seattle game isn't all that exciting. So I don't mind getting some exposure to Tampa and Washington. And I think that game will be competitive. I mean, I certainly don't expect Washington to go and, move the football with ease by any means. But that defense is legit. That pass rush is certainly one of the best in the league. And I think they'll at least do enough to keep that game competitive for a while, maybe force a turnover or two. So the Seattle receivers are always a little bit polarizing because it's hard to pick between Metcalf and Lockett. Yeah. The Rams have shown that they will use Ramsey on Metcalf. They did that pretty extensively in the 2 regular season meetings. And if you look at the game log, Metcalf had 6 for 59 a couple weeks ago against the Rams and just 2 for 28 the first time those two teams met. Now, to be fair, Lockett didn't do a ton either in those games, but Ramsey's not a guy I like to mess with. So in my tournament builds, I'm a little underweight on Metcalf. I'm a little overweight on Lockett. I'm not fading either. I mean, on a short slate, but I think Lockett is the guy I want to take a higher stance on today. Any other receivers that you got any hot takes on or thoughts?
Let me think here. I will say I have similar thoughts about Seattle. That game sandwiched right in the middle today is kind of going to, in a weird way, maybe dictate the slate, because I just about that game as a whole, you have this Rams team where who knows how healthy Jared Goff is, but even when he is healthy, they're not, not one guy's getting super volume. It's tough to pick between Kupp and Woods some weeks when they both have plus matchups. For much of the year, they had 3 running backs working in the rotation. We think now Cam Akers is going to be the guy who is also going to garner a ton of ownership, and we'll get the running backs, I'm sure momentarily. But that game is, there's going to be one guy that does it in that game. And when you have 2 teams playing on a 3-game slate where sometimes you don't really know where the volume is going to go, because we've seen it be either a Lockett game or a Metcalf game. It's really tough to play both, especially, when they're highly priced throughout the season. I think maybe we've had 1 or 2 weeks this year where they both kind of hit value when the Seahawks rolled. But in my opinion, you really can't play both of them. Ramsey's a hell of a matchup. You're absolutely right. So I guess my question to you is, with Buffalo kind of being a popular stack, are you, and is there anybody to run it back with that pops out to you on that Indy side? I mean, you have some guys that are relevant. T.Y. Hilton's kind of had this second half resurgence, but is it necessary for a run back on this 3-gamer? Like, where do you stand in terms of like a rule like that, and if there's any interest?
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly the exciting play at receiver, but I actually kind of like Nyheim Hines today. Everybody's going to be on, this is kind of a segue into running back, I guess. Everyone's going to be on Jonathan Taylor, 38% ownership. I think on FanDuel, it's north of 40. And if you think that Buffalo's pass offense keeps it rolling and Indy gets behind, well, they're still going to use Hines as their pass catching back. I mean, he's not going to get 20 carries by any means. And I know Taylor's been great. But you look at the targets for Hines, 7, 5, 3, 4, 3, and some of those lower target games were against Houston, and games where, they got ahead or Taylor was just able to run. 10 targets against Tennessee. So in the games where the Colts get behind, it's Hines that's, getting those looks in the passing game, and better play on DraftKings than he is on FanDuel with the full PPR, but he's only 4,700 on DK. So Hines is in a lot of my lineups where I've got pretty good exposure to the Buffalo offense, because if you think Buffalo is going to get a lead, then Hines is going to be more involved. So what's your take on those Indy running backs?
You're still stealing my thunder there, but I'm glad. Because I like the Hines call. You definitely get some leverage there for sure. And Jonathan Taylor has looked great. I'm sure there'll be a ton of recency bias there. He's a very good running back. I looked at his props to score, and he's like -110, I think. So by all means, Jonathan Taylor is certainly a good play, but I'm willing to play Hines, because if you're listening to the whole show, it sounds like I'm playing a lot of Buffalo pass attack. So I do like Hines. I think Zach Pascal is interesting, and maybe some larger field stuff. Michael Pittman, was popping, had some hype in the middle of the year, and just statistically the last 3 to 5 weeks, it kind of looks like he's taken a back seat in that offense. So Indy's another team where Rivers spreads the ball out. There's not, no one's really going to get double-digit targets, and honestly, without looking, I guess I'd be surprised if I scrolled through the logs and saw that anybody had 10 targets in that Indy team in a game this year. So another team that spreads the ball around, but Hines is kind of that, even that neutral game script kind of guy, because he's going to be running routes and passing situations as it is. So I do like Hines. Taylor's the cash play for sure if you're playing cash, but I'm with you there. But it's another team with a trio of receivers where Hilton will garner the most ownership, but I'm not certain that he's the play in that game either.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's all right, but no strong stance there on Hilton for me. So certainly have some exposure to him, but probably about even with the field. All right, let's talk about these other running backs. And I don't want to steal your thunder on these top end guys. So we've got basically, we kind of touched on Taylor, but the other 3 running backs with the highest ownership: Akers, Carson, Ronald Jones. Who is it's not a great slate for backs, right. But is there a guy that you feel most comfortable with out of that group, the rest of the top owned running backs today?
Out of that group, I can't say that I'm hitting the smash button on any of them. I do think Akers is probably my favorite. I just think there's the potential in that game to maybe shoot out a little more than maybe the public is perceiving, with the Jared Goff injuries and the Rams defense with Jalen Ramsey. But I do lean Akers a little. 40% is a lot for me to want to invest in Ronald Jones. And in my tournament builds, I'm high on Mike Evans. I think he has some killer upside and killer leverage. So I will be under the field on Ronald Jones, I think, today. It's where I'm looking right now.
Yeah, always tough to peg those Tampa backs. And you see, Fournette was the guy there that was super chalky a few weeks back and got there by falling into the end zone a couple times. And, Jones can do that, but a tough matchup for them today. But it's just, we talk about these lower end guys too, hard to get excited about the Buffalo running back. So you kind of mentioned earlier in the show that McKissick was the guy you're on for Washington. So maybe for those that are just tuning in, what do you think about playing McKissick today?
Yeah, I like McKissick. Gibson's status is in doubt. So that, like you made a point earlier in the show, there will be some lower owned guys on a 3-game slate. Just we don't really have hard news on Gibson specifically. And it seems like Alex Smith will likely be out. So regardless if Gibson's out, I do like McKissick. And we've seen his upside. Obviously, really good play on DraftKings. He's a pass-catching running back, but he's also more than serviceable on FanDuel today, especially if he comes in at sub 15%. In a perfect storm, I guess he has upside to be one of the top 2 or 3 score running backs on the slate. But I think there's some serious leverage there. You made a great point there as well. And I think there's enough pieces in that late game that you can leave, 2 to 3 spots open and make the right pivots and still have a really good lineup with some leverage in the late game.
For sure. I just, that game worries me because, everybody is on Buffalo so heavy. And I think, when you look at the betting numbers, it's like, 80% of the money or 90% of the money on Buffalo. And it's like, those are the games that tend to end up going the other way. The books are pretty sharp, but hard to see the Bills not, at least winning it. Whether they cover or not, it's another matter. But again, for those of you that might be in a legal sports betting state, there are a lot of states that are allowing that now. I'd like Washington to keep their game close with Tampa tonight. I don't expect them to win, but I think a 9-point line with how talented their defense is just a little too much. I know it's Brady in the playoffs, but I like Washington to cover there tonight. So anything you like from a betting perspective today?
Well, prop wise, I like Nyheim Hines over his receiving yards. I think what was it? I'll get back to you on that. I believe it was about 30. I think so. Just in terms of I'll have to look at that, but in terms of game script and game flow, I like the Hines, the over. I do think Washington will keep it under 9. I'm with you on there. I am a little worried with the potential quarterback swap again if Smith doesn't go. But Tampa Bay's been pretty inconsistent throughout the course of the year. I'm not saying Tom Brady's going to go out here and lay an egg in the playoffs, but he's had some real head scratchers this year from time to time. They've dealt with a lot of injuries themselves. They bring in Antonio Brown out of the blue after Bruce Arians said no way, no how, and here he is. Here's Antonio Brown. So even so, just in terms of getting back to that game, another team where where's the volume going to go? Sometimes you just don't know. It seems statistically like Evans kind of has the air yard role there, but if he's really not 100%, and I still like him for GPPs as just a red zone threat, there's been some Godwin games more recently, but you go back a month and a half, 2 months, it looked, look at the numbers. Antonio Brown was just getting peppered with targets. So there's a couple of tough teams on this slate where they're just the volume spread out in these passing games. It makes for a pretty good 3-gamer.
Yeah, for sure. We didn't really touch on tight end. We'll get to questions if any of you have them here in a sec. So feel free to drop those right now in the Crunch Time Discord chat. If you have them, we'll get right to them here. But tight end, not sexy on this slate by any means. Logan Thomas will be the most popular. If you look at his targets, at least 6 targets in 5 straight games, 2 double-digit target games in there. We know whoever's at quarterback for Washington, whether it's Smith or Heineke, they're going to be, dumping it off and going with those short intermediate passes. So Thomas should get his targets again today. Gronk in the playoffs with Brady. He'll get his red zone looks, but really nobody that's got a super safe floor here outside of Thomas. So he's going to be the guy most people look to. But do you have a hot take at tight end?
I'm sad to say that I really don't. I have more Dawson Knox than I probably planned to have, just because I'm playing Josh Allen pretty much everywhere, and I'm a fan of stacking more than just one or two guys on today's 3-game slate. So I can't say that I'm going to leave the show and feel great that I have a ton of Dawson Knox, but I'm definitely overweight on the field. Even with how bad Seattle's defense has been, I mean, historically bad. Higbee versus Gerald Everett. I don't really know what to tell you there. Higbee had that monster 3-touchdown game earlier this year, and everybody said, well, it's Higbee's role to lose now, but I'm not so sure that's the case. So if you're playing a single bullet in a large field, I think Gerald Everett, warrants some consideration to maybe, if he scores, I mean, he pretty much does what you want to do. 6 points from Gerald Everett, 6.5 on FanDuel. I'll take it and run at that point. So not a lot there. Gronk doesn't see the volume he used to, obviously, but I think the ownership projections that we have on RG, Logan Thomas, Gronk, Higbee, Knox in that order on FanDuel are pretty accurate in terms of my confidence rankings in them.
All right, and before I forget to pass it along, as I'm not on tomorrow, and I'm gonna look and see what this is now. But the one you got me thinking when you talked about props a minute ago, and I want to see where it's at now. So that the Ravens Titans game, when it opened on DraftKings, J.K. Dobbins was plus 145 to score a touchdown, which is ridiculous. The guy has scored in like 6 straight games, and he's clearly become the guy there in Baltimore. Mark Ingram's barely seeing the field. Dobbins he's a really good back, and he fits really well in that Baltimore offense. And now, so it was plus 145 on Thursday. It was plus 125 yesterday. It's minus 112 now. So I actually think that there's probably still room for that to shrink a little bit. Maybe until it gets up to like minus 125 or 130, I think you can play Dobbins to score. That Tennessee defense has not been very good over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So that's my prop that I like a lot tomorrow.
3 or 4 weeks, STL. I haven't missed a Titans game since probably 2007. They haven't been good for 16 weeks. I like where your head's at there. And especially since Mark Ingram finally got faded out of the offense. It took the full season to get rid of him.
Too long. As a Baltimore fan, it was frustrating, but it's hey, the Titans have had their number last year's playoffs and this year's regular season game, so that will certainly be a fun game to keep an eye on tomorrow. And for the two teams that both, they're 1 and 2 in the league in rushing yards, and for that game to still have a total in the 50s, I guess some of that's the testament to Tennessee's defense, but should be some big plays in that game. So.
Agreed. By the way, Nyheim Hines on FanDuel Sportsbook, his over receiving yards is 26.5. So if he doesn't hit that over, I'm also going to lose money on FanDuel today too. So I'm doubling down here, taking Nyheim Hines over 26.5. I just feel like that's kind of a little bit like egregiously low. I don't know. For me, that was one of my favorite prop picks there for today, 26.5.
All right, yeah, and some of the games where he's gotten the targets, I mean, he had a 45, a 54, 31, 66, a 50. Some of these games in here, that Pittsburgh game was wonky because the Colts got out to like a 3-score lead and then blew it, but they didn't throw a ton in that game. The Houston games that they won, Raiders game, Jonathan Taylor, went nuts in that game too. So I like that call. I think that's a pretty low number. So, all right, we've got a few questions in here. I will we'll get through them so that these people can get their answers before lock. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes until kickoff of that first game. So get those lineups finalized. 2v2 DraftKings cash. Let's see, Thomas and McLaurin or Knox and Taylor.
That's tough. For me, it's Taylor Knox, just for the sake of getting Jonathan Taylor in there at the ownership he is going to carry. Some people have varying opinions on how to play cash. If I know there's a guy with a really high ceiling that's going to be very chalky, I want to use him. So I would take Jonathan Taylor and Dawson Knox.
Yeah. He had also asked if 3 Washington players was fine for cash. That's probably a bit hot. I mean, McLaurin's been banged up. Gibson's banged up. We don't know their quarterback situation. So I'd probably dial that back to maybe 2 at most. With Thomas is certainly fine, but I kind of like that Knox-Taylor combo as well. If you're stacking Buffalo in a GPP, Moss or Singletary?
For me, it's Singletary because he catches the passes, and if I'm stacking Buffalo, I have Josh Allen. So I do think Zach Moss negatively correlates with Allen. So if you're hedging yourself and you're not playing Josh Allen, you could probably hope Moss vultures a couple of touchdowns inside the 5-yard line and another lineup construction if you want. But for me personally, it's a no-brainer. I'm running Singletary.
Yeah, I like him better in team stacks as well. Large field tournament, Goff or Rivers?
Oh man, is that a gun to head? Gun to head, just pull the trigger.
Yes.
As much there's a lot of unknown around Goff, but I think he's easier to stack a receiver with. And Seattle's defense has been historically bad. It's not the Legion of Boom anymore. So I think a Goff play with one of his receivers, or more of it. At that point, you might as well play multiple Rams in your team. I like the Goff idea, I think.
Yeah, I think the upside is there with Goff. I mean, I've got a few Rivers GPP teams, but I don't feel great about it. Jamal Adams is a little banged up as well. He's going to play, but that's obviously the key to Seattle's defense. So it doesn't hurt Goff that he's a little bit banged up. So is it bad to lock Allen and Diggs in the 20 max? So 20 lineups all with Allen and Diggs. I mean, I don't hate that idea at all. They're clearly the best combo.
Yeah. I don't hate it either. We have Diggs projected at 75+% ownership.
Yeah.
I just don't think he's a guy you can fade today either. I understand there could be super leverage or God forbid an ankle tweak or something like that, but no problems with that.
Weekend slate. Would you rather stack Buffalo or Baltimore?
Baltimore's maybe I should give you the floor on that. For me, still a fairly small slate, I'm more prone to stack a team that throws the ball a lot. Lamar Jackson, people have been playing him naked sometimes this year, or maybe just playing him with Andrews because he returns a lot of his value with his legs, as you know. So what's your take on that? Obviously following Baltimore more closely than probably most people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you can play Marquise Brown or you can play Dobbins, and Jackson, but just the way they run the football is just tough for all of them to get there unless they have a ton of big plays. Could happen with the matchup, but I'd lean Buffalo there. So, all right, we got like 2 minutes. We'll get through the last few here real quick. Woods or Lockett in cash?
Oh, Lockett.
Lockett for me as well. From YouTube chat, a couple questions here. J.K. Dobbins or Nick Chubb?
Wow. I'm gonna say Dobbins this week.
Yeah, I like Dobbins as well, though. I think Cleveland is gonna have a chance to win tomorrow. They split their backs a little bit. I like Dobbins a little better. Someone asked me if I am underweight on McLaurin, and I am, just because of the quarterback uncertainty and the fact that he's a little bit banged up. I don't mind him in tournaments, but just not a guy you need to prioritize today. All right, we'll get through one more here for lock. We're under a minute. Another YouTube question. Can you play all 3 Buffalo receivers together? So Beasley, Brown, Diggs. Can you play them all in the same lineup?
Weird. You said Gabe Davis incorrectly there.
I'm sorry. No disrespect to Gabe Davis.
For GPPs, I think you got to throw Davis in there as well. And, every now and then Isaiah McKenzie, rears his ugly head in there for a gadget play too. So I love the full stack for GPPs. Yep.
Yeah, it's always interesting with those Buffalo receivers. I mean, you can see Roberts doesn't really have much of a projection, but going to be some ownership on all 5 of those guys. I think obviously Davis and McKenzie would be a little bit more relevant if Beasley wouldn't have been able to go, but there is the potential that he's on a bit of a pitch count there too. So like Davis on the weeks where where Brown was out, played Davis quite a bit. So I think I did put him at like 10% in my GPP builds today. So we're at lock. That's oh, well, we got 105. All right. They pushed it back. They got the extra 5 minutes, the playoff games.
Classic.
You got the extra pregame. And so they pushed it back to 105. Not sure if both FanDuel and DraftKings did that or just one of the sites, but I'll take a peek here quick. I know FanDuel for sure was looking at some overlays. So
yeah, FanDuel's pushed back.
Yep, FanDuel's at 105. So extra 5 minutes, last chance to finalize those lineups, and we can hang out for a couple more minutes if anybody's got some last ditch questions. But what are you looking at for tomorrow? I mean, obviously we touched on Baltimore and Tennessee a little bit. Anything else in those games? The Bears and Saints, we gave it a few extra days for the Saints to get some of their players back. They've had some injuries and some COVID issues. And then you got Cleveland and Pittsburgh tomorrow night. Should be a fun game too.
I'd be lying if I looked a ton into it between NBA and I'm on tags and expert survey tomorrow too. So I haven't really sat down and dove in. I did see before the show that the Browns got Harrison Bryant back off the COVID list and 2 other guys. So I think maybe it might just be for me a wake up in the morning thing and see if there's any more news, because who's in that late, once again, the late game, come on, is going to be kind of maybe dictate some of the slate. But the Saints have been pretty good against the run all year, and this was one of my initial thoughts. They funnel the run, they stop the run, and Chicago has been successful by making David Montgomery their workhorse. Finally, Matt Nagy gets rid of play calling, and they utilize David Montgomery, who people have just been bashing on Twitter, with memes, etc., for the past couple of years. But I kind of think the Bears might struggle against New Orleans, and if they can't run the ball 20 times with Montgomery, that kind of signifies to me that maybe Allen Robinson is going to be one of the better players tomorrow. And Montgomery's going to carry ownership, 3-gamer, and just the way he's been running the ball. And I guess my initial thought was I'm probably going to go underweight on Montgomery in tournaments.
Yeah, I like that call. The Bears are pretty big underdogs as well. I think double digits, which is pretty rare for a playoff game. So one more question from the YouTube chat here. Davis or Brown? Now they're really testing you. You like Davis more than Brown?
I'm playing Gabe Davis in some large field stuff, but I do have some more, I guess you could say, optimal-ish builds with John Brown, just because he's higher in the pecking order than Gabe Davis.
Yeah. Tough to go against Brown there.
Yeah.
As the little safer of an option. Weird to think of him as a safe play, but just with the way that offense has been humming, should be some production in those Buffalo pass catchers for sure. All right. Not seeing any additional last minute news here. Obviously, we're probably not going to get news on Antonio Gibson until later. So, if you are playing some Gibson, I would make sure that he is into your flex positions to give yourself more options available there should he end up, getting ruled out. It's not expected, but Sean in the chat and FanDuel GPPs for the full weekend, fading Derrick Henry. How about that?
Wouldn't do it.
I can't do it. Guy is just a machine. I mean, I think, and he's run over the Ravens twice last year's playoffs and in their regular season game. But look, I wouldn't fade him completely, but you can do some builds where, right, if you think the Titans get a lead, you're playing Henry and maybe you're running that back with Marquise Brown or you're running that back with Andrews. And you can do some builds where you think the Ravens get a lead, and you use Dobbins or Lamar Jackson, and, maybe you don't play Henry in those lineups and you use A.J. Brown or Corey Davis or something like that. So, you can play that from a game script perspective, because the only way that Henry's not going to get his tomorrow is if, Baltimore gets out to a 21-0 lead midway through the second quarter or something like that, which isn't the most likely outcome, but it could certainly happen. I mean, so you make those kind of game flow builds. But if I was doing anything in semblance of multi-entry, I can't fade Henry at this point. Just dude's nuts. So yeah, tough to fade him.
I'm with you.
Yeah, so we've hit 105 now. Don't think we'll get pushed back after that. Probably needs to lock here to get to the kickoff of that first game. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Not seeing any more questions in the chat that we missed. So good luck to all of you on today and tomorrow's slates. We'll have 2 shows for you tomorrow morning as well. Looks like we've got Tambo and Grant on the Lineup HQ show, and Luch will be back with you with Tuttle on Crunch Time tomorrow, heading up to the Sunday NFL lock. And then we'll also have you covered with NBA Crunch Time tonight, Britt and Keith on that show. And then I will be on with Britt tomorrow night for NBA Crunch Time. So we got you covered for hoops and for football this weekend. Best of luck. Enjoy the games, everybody. And would like to thank our producer, Devin. Always working hard behind the scenes, as Roth would say. Since this is a crunch time, I got to say that. And thank my fellow Justin for joining me today. So, Luch, nice working with you.
You too. Good luck with the Ravens.
And good luck with the Titans. One of us will be happy tomorrow. So good luck, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll catch you later.